Okay.
We've decided no longer to do D&D. We're just going to do nerd ASMR.
Get the dice rolling.
I would like you to think about this sound as you roll initiative.
This is the sound
Plus
of it.
5.
This is
Vorpal sword.
This is the sound of a 20. This is the sound of a 1.
I hope today all your 20s be natural, and all your 1s be at advantage.
What?
I cast magic missile.
Alright, so we're recording, we're streaming. I see our faces on Twitch. Looks like great success. So with that in mind, you'll notice that Ben is...
Oh my god, it just starts out with Brian going, I cast magic missile. That's awesome.
Cold
We're
open.
going to keep it.
It's a cold open.
Yeah, it is.
Ben is currently frequenting the steps with his beautiful wife and warrior son. They are vacationing.
Yeah.
Are we actually recording the whole thing? Yeah.
Yeah, we're recording. We're live.
Now.
We're live.
We are live. Yeah.
We are live.
We are live. There will be some edits to get rid of this, but it is Monday, and we welcome you to Nerds of Legends. This time, Ben is absent. He is in Colorado with the wife and child.
I said that.
Yes, Brendan did tell you, but that was more of a rambling. So, today we are going to be discussing world building. And as always, for introductions, we have Brian, and at the bottom we have Brendan, and myself. I am Joel. I'm pretty sure they're used to me talking all the time. I was the one that did the most of it. So we're going to start out with world building. These are two. We're going to start out. How long have you guys been DMing? I know Brian.
Specifically DMing?
You would consider being a game master. How many? Do you have years of experience? Are you relatively new? Give a little bit of your history.
For myself, I've been playing D&D for nearly 20 years at this point. Though not all of that has obviously been as a game master. I've been off and on, mostly as a game master, but sometimes I'll occasionally jump into the player slot. I actually got my start with D&D at a garage sale where I bought the original red box. I didn't know what it was because all I saw was dragons on the front, and I'm like, oh, I love dragons. So
His soul.
Yeah. And of course, from there, I had no idea what I was doing because it's the, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just one of those things where it's like you buy it and then you're like, I have no idea what it is, but it looks cool, you know. Like, I got involved with that, and the first time I actually played was much later on when I joined a 3.5 game with my friends, and I actually had a different game master then to kind of teach me the ropes, and obviously 3.5 was a way different beast than what you got in the red box, so I had to learn the game all over again. And from there, I don't know, something about the way that he DM'd made me want to DM. Or maybe it was just the fact that I really wanted to play way more often than I was actually getting to. So, I don't know, it was just one of those things where it was almost, I won't say immediately, but I knew that I wanted to do way more than I was getting. So I knew that I had to hone my skills and eventually become a DM.
That is true. When you can DM, when you can run the game, you can game all the time. It's easier to find players than it is to find somebody to run it. So, all right, moving down to Brendan. A little bit of history about yourself.
Yeah. So the first literature related to D&D that I ever had the pleasure to see was at my public library. So I was maybe 11, 12, 13, right around the age where your parents start letting you watch all of the movie without fast forwarding, right? And hardcover copies of the Dungeon Master Guide, Fiend Folio, and Player's Handbook. So statue with the rubies and the Githyanki and just first ed AD&D stuff. I remember spending hours just like reading the rules and the exceptions to the rules and how the Cavaliers and the Bards and the Barbarians are specialty classes. And I was like, oh, okay, this is what D&D must be to everyone I know who's talking about it at school. Not the case. So we attempt that, and then we realize, hey, this is different from all the video games we're playing that use Stako, that are using like second ed rules. And hey, this is different than the D&D that all the kids at school are playing. They're playing third. So we were more initiated into the concept of D&D before the actual rules and complications of it. So after fumbling around with these first ed books, which I hope the library doesn't even lend them out anymore. They're probably worth so much because of how good of a quality they were in. We bought at Toys R Us a third ed D&D with a full set of dice and paper punch outs for the creatures and player characters and everything. Had like a truncated version of the player's handbook. It was fully softcover, and it was in a box of the same dimensions of like Sorry or Monopoly or full size basement board games, and they were marketing it as a board game. That's when I really first got my spurs with dungeon mastering in general, because I realized I'm like, okay, I play and this is fun. But there's no Displacer Beast in this scenario because they reduced the game to a series of scenarios first, and then you could play a campaign. I'm like, I think that thing looks cool. The prehensile tentacles are amazing. So we fast forwarded one with a Displacer Beast. I'm like, oh, that's pretty tough. What if that was in the same room as an ogre, and you could get the Displacer Beast to like attack the ogre instead of fighting the ogre? That sounds pretty novel, right? What if you like threw food over and they both fought over it? Oh, that's not in the book. What if I make it? And so it's just this natural progression of, I guess, the same reason you take apart an old VCR, just wanting to break it, wanting to push the boundaries, and realize that was far more fun for me than having limitations of you're a level 3 fighter, you do this, this, and this. So more of the overarching macro of filming a movie than being a component part of it, I guess, if you think about it from a narrative sense. And I've played occasionally, but all through college I was perma-DM. After college I ran a 4.5-5 year campaign. So I played on occasion, like a Gen Con and stuff, but it's always just been more fun for me to understand the rules of, like, let's use football as a metaphor. If you are a coach, you've probably had experience playing back in the day as a receiver or a wideout or something. But you know so much more comprehensively about the game if you're on the sidelines. And so it's always what drew me to the game.
All right. So we're going to go into, just curious, which do you guys prefer?
Between
DMing
playing or being a DM?
I'll answer in a way, I'll try not to be arrogant with it, but it's like, we've all had good DMs and less than good DMs. And if you go out of your way and write like 6 pages of backstory and draw a portrait and you do all this stuff with your character and you go to a campaign, this happened to me in high school, and the campaign is a front to get everyone in the same room with a new fresh 2-liter Mountain Dew and a functioning Xbox with the Halo 2, then it's kind of like, oh, okay, this is a pretense to hang out, not a pretense to have a campaign. And you're stuck there for 4 or 5 hours. If you're the DM, it's sort of like it's like the same anxiety of like people who are afraid of flying in airplanes, where it's like, oh, hey, like it's out of my control if something were to happen. Would you be afraid of airplanes if you flew it? Like, oh no. Like if I flew it without a license and I crashed the plane and ended my life, it's on me. But if I'm in an airplane, someone else is flying, then I'm scared. It's the same thing. It's like, oh, if this campaign is terrible or goes off the rails, or I'm incapable of keeping the party, in the story, it's on me as the DM. If I'm in a campaign
you're saying
playing,
it's more of you have the control, so if you notice it going south, you can quickly correct, as opposed to throwing cues at somebody else at home, but they hoping they pick it up.
Yeah, it's like the onus of quality is on you, and
okay.
For some people that might be anxiety inducing. For me, it's kind of like I like the challenge of, because everyone wants something different when they're playing D&D. Some people want to take a lot of heads. just want to crit all day, right? Some people want to murder hobo, and they're there for the loot. They're there for the note cards that they have next to their character sheet. Some people love to meet new characters and the speechcraft and the working their way out of situations. I played a whole campaign where it was myself and 2 other people, triple 18 charisma characters, and we tried to go as far as we could without drawing a weapon. And for some people, that might be boring. So yeah,
we're gonna go over to Brian and see you have a. I feel like this is a topic you could go into an enormous amount of detail in.
Of course.
So, I have a couple other questions to ask you guys. Sorry, not to be rude, but
I think that I'm versatile. I could do both. I mean, if you ask me which one I prefer, I find that I have way more creative license when I'm the DM, and I also really enjoy like making little props and kind of like doing creative things for my players and everything else. So I think that I have a little bit more artistic license as a DM, but ultimately I'm actually fine with either one. Whatever gets me to the gaming table, really.
Okay. Now, when you guys create a setting, what is the first thing you guys figure out? We're going to start with Brian and then go to Brendan. What is the first thing you think about when you're like, I have a campaign, and after you've given out the idea that you're going to create a campaign, what is the first thing you guys come up with?
Well, the first thing that I have to ask myself is, what system am I playing in? Because unlike some of my other compatriots, I really enjoy doing multiple different game systems. So sometimes I like doing Call of Cthulhu, sometimes I like doing D&D, sometimes I like to do Vampire. Sometimes I might like to try the Alien RPG or the One Ring, or maybe I'm doing something different where, like, a new company has come out with a new D&D setting, and so now I'm incorporating the same, like, D&D base, but I've got, like, new core rules that are adding things on top of that. So, the biggest question right off the bat is, okay, what am I working with? What are my base settings that I have to go forward with?
Okay.
So that's the biggest question right off the bat. Immediately after that, I then have to ask myself, okay, well, is this homebrew or am I running something that's established? Because I'm a working man, I have a typical job and whatnot, so I don't always have as much time as I might want to devote to like a full campaign. So I find that more often than not, the published stuff is immensely helpful, if nothing else, because that takes some of the burden off of my shoulders. I can use maps, I can use stat blocks, I can use all sorts of things that are from a published setting. And then if I want to, I can always tweak that to make it a little bit more individualistic for my players. I don't have to stick to the exact book as written, but it helps to have that basic framework.
Okay. Brendan.
Yeah, Brian brings
What are your...
Yeah, he brings up a very good point. Before you even think about the narrative, if you're playing Exalted, for example, no one is really mundane. You all have, to an extent, powers. If you're playing Hackmaster, your combat rules are so much more intricate because you're actually interacting in combat per second. So if you're swinging a big heavy sword and you have like a 16-second recharge, you attack, you cut a guy in half, and then the rest of your party is doing something for each second until you bring the sword back around. So it lends itself to close quarters combat of a small scale. D&D is rather straightforward with its combat, with the initiative system, especially with the newer editions, where that you can focus on everything about equally. There's the magic system, there's a macro. You can create a world, and you can have combat and puzzles and speechcraft, and no one of those really take over if you're balancing your time correctly. I prefer D&D 5th Ed because the class system and the skill system are sort of more streamlined compared to 3.5, and I can focus more on the narrative and the characters, and the system is sort of secondary to that. We've all played with a rules lawyer. We've all played with people who are metagaming, and I always want to reward someone being intelligent and doing something advantageous if it's in line with their character. I mean, I played illiterate characters. I played characters who were intoxicated. I can't be metagaming if those characters' perceptions are limited, right? So there will always be different people. And I've run campaigns for people who just want to metagame, and I've run campaigns for people that want their characters to live as long as possible because they want to grow that character. The trick with being a DM is to balance it all. When I start a story, I don't start with names of locations. I don't start with the name of the world or the countries. I start with a narrative hook. So for the last campaign I did, the 5-year one, I ran with what if, I kind of took it a little bit from Secret Wars, the Hickman run. What happens when gates, like Planescape? What happens if gates become unstable and multiple dimensions infringe on one another? How weird would it be to live in a world that is at the intersection of that? And it's a great example of being able to pull in different characters from different settings. And I'm like, okay, this is giving me a world of entropy and cosmic shift. Weird things are going to happen, and from there, I start.
Okay, so you're more a build because you're more build to play the world as it goes. And I know I've played with Brian where you've done that. You've done that a few times, and I've also Brian's the one that taught me how to play. I myself cannot do the mod. I can't focus on them long enough. I've tried. I get lost because people are like, "Where are we going?" And then I'm off. Like I can't keep up with it. I am 100% homebrew. And if it wasn't for D&D Beyond and me being able to research on the fly, most of my stuff would just be chaotic. So, and it's still pretty chaotic. All right. Do you guys have a default NPC? When you play, do you have a character that somehow ends up in one incarnation or another in all of your campaigns? And example, Brian and Ben give me shit a lot of the times because all my guys seem to have this kind of accent. And so they're like, you got just one guy walking around just being like, do you guys have a default voice or character that you go to? We'll start with Brendan this time.
I get what you're saying. Do we have Nurse Joys, right? In every Poké town, is it the same woman running the Pokemon Center? I will say, I play with people that obviously nobody wants their character to die, right? People want to see their characters go through change and go through climaxes and learn and live. To do that, you need to build rapport. It's just like how you get such a more complex idea of a person watching a television show than a movie, because a movie, intrinsically is shorter. So you have to sort of trim things. You get the subtlety and the nuance of a character when you have seasons to work with them. It's the same thing with a campaign. If I have recurring NPCs, my characters can build rapport with them. So I have certain NPCs that will show up. There's one, Gracchus. He's a disgraced wizard who was kicked out of his magic academy for cutting too many corners. And so instead of accepting that gracefully or even contesting being kicked out, he assumes the role of his professor, steals a bunch of artifacts, and then starts doing illicit activity with criminals under his professor's name, and they think he's this renowned wizard. So he gets in all sorts of trouble. He's kind of like Harry Mudd, if you've watched Star Trek TOS. This recurring, or Kirk's just like, oh god, it's Harry. So it's like, if I have a character I need to scapegoat, or I need to have this comedic relief, or, very Doc Venture, like, his danger is in his power and his ability to fail in equal measure. If I need a character that is like, when you're playing a video game that gives you the debriefing and gives you your equipment, like M or Q for a Bond movie. I have characters I go to that give them assignments that they can report to. So my NPCs are recurring, but they fill particular roles that allow the player characters to build and establish rapport. So it's almost like fighting that Nurse Joy effect. So they're recurring characters, but they're specifically different because I have them pinned for specific roles in the campaign as a supporting cast.
Okay. Brian, what about you?
when I started off DMing all those years ago, I found it very easy to put in a particular NPC as sort of like a guiding influence. Like I wanted, because I was teaching a lot of people how to play at that time. So one of the things I would do is I would always have kind of a friendly NPC to kind of help them along, sort of thing. I would give them quests, maybe give them magic items, so on and so forth. And for the longest time, yeah, that was kind of the thing I did, where I had like a very particular NPC helping people out. But I eventually got away from that because while I found it useful in the same way, I also found it terribly limiting. Because for one, if you're always in the same world sort of thing, then depending on how you have your world set up, I mean, that might limit you as far as what kind of a game you can focus on. Like one of the reasons why I like all the different modules that like come out for D&D is that a lot of them focus on different ways to play D&D. Like you have Ravenloft, which is more of a horror-focused RPG, you know? Like it has very particular influences that, you know, you can see in the way that it's written. Same thing goes for something like this Strixhaven book. Obviously, that's very influenced by, you know, popular media, especially when it comes to like Harry Potter and the Wizarding World sort of thing. And a lot of them have, you know, I mean, you could insert like random NPCs into those adventures, and in all honesty, your players would probably never even know the difference. I mean, obviously they would notice that you keep putting in the same NPC. But as far as like, oh, hey, I need a person who's a magic user. And it's like, okay, well, I have a generic magic user that I just kind of use for all my games sort of thing. Like, you know, or I need a fighter. You know, you can slot those characters in as needed. So I think that while it's an interesting thing to do, especially when you're new, I like to branch out a little bit more now that I'm, you know, not so new. Like, I like to try to challenge myself using the same characters over and over
again. So, talking about characters, let's go into when you create an encounter. What does that look like for you? I know you homebrew. Do you adapt? I remember I had an issue with the rules lawyer very, very beginning, and I was flummoxed because like every time I would say something like that creature can't do that, and I couldn't get around it because I was very hard in using only the monster manual and what it said. So if it didn't deviate, so I'm getting told by my players the world I'm creating isn't appropriate. And I know Brian gave me the best piece of advice was the person goes, "Oh, this can't do that." And he goes, "Well, just say, huh, weird. This one can." And that kind of like that little response blew my world up. I'm like, oh my God, now I got toads that regrow limbs and shoot acid and like all kinds of made up shit. So what does that look like for you guys? Are you now stick only when you've homebrewed stuff, not taking it out of the DM guide, or if you have times when you had to modify a creature to fit an encounter, to fit your narrative. What did that look like? We'll start with Brian and go to Brent.
One of the things I found that is the best bit of advice I ever heard from anyone is not to get bogged down in smaller details. Like, if you want to make an encounter, just make an encounter. If it doesn't work, then okay, it doesn't work. You've got a new tool for next time then. You know, you should always be willing to experiment. You should always be willing, like, never get locked into what they call the Matt Mercer effect, where you think you have to do something a particular way because someone else did it a particular way. Like, if you've got a really great DM that you look up to, and that has inspired you to get started into DMing for yourself and whatnot, don't ever think that you have to be like that person. If you watch Critical Role, you don't have to be Matt Mercer. You don't have to be Christopher Perkins. You don't have to be Jeremy Crawford. You know what I'm saying? You can take elements of your favorite DMs and you can kind of like mishmash them into your own like Frankenstein, but never feel like you have to be just one thing. You can be anything, and that's the beauty of D&D. When you're creating an encounter, fucking who cares what the book says? If some rules lawyer comes up to you and is all like, wait a second, that troll shouldn't be able to do that, you'd look them in the eye and be like, yeah, that's weird, isn't it? Yeah. Hey, roll me an Arcana check. And he's like, oh, fuck. Because now he's like actually worried you came up with something. And you're just like on the fly. You're all like, I didn't even fucking know I couldn't do that. But like now you've got him fucking worried because you're like, oh shit, did he modify something? And he's like thinking to himself, he's like doing that like 1,000 fucking stare where he's just like, oh no.
All right, Brendan.
Yeah, the thing I usually tell people, I've had friends approach me and they're like, hey, I'm going to DM for the first time. What's your advice? That's a very open-ended question, right? And DMing, you're wearing a lot of hats as a DM. The first thing I tell them is that you are not running a game of, let's say, 5th Ed D&D and you're the DM. You are running your game of 5th Ed D&D. The rules are supplementary to the fact that you're an omnipotent creator, right? I'm not saying go on a power trip, but you're the narrator. This is your story. And a way to avoid tropiness, like for example, I had a party one time where an individual was playing a character who was a fish out of water, did not understand the world that she was thrown into. He was playing a female character. And the player realized that the town had been enthralled by an aboleth. There's no way that the character would know that coming from an outside dimension and playing a naive young character who is overtly kind to everyone, but the player knew it was an aboleth and immediately metagamed and won the encounter handedly. You avoid that situation if you just make your own creatures. I go out of my way. I never run a module by the book. I've run module games that are pre-made, but I always put my own signature on them. And especially when I'm running my homebrew campaigns, I can't DM without homebrewing. The first thing I do when I read a rulebook is I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I don't like that. I'm changing it. It is supplementary to you. And a way you avoid the expectations and the tropiness and the metagaming is just to make your own creatures. I've had parties fight sentient lobsters that rise out of the water. I've had parties fight extra dimensional aliens that separate their society by a caste system so that the highest echelons of the race know time travel and don't tell the lower caste of their society for security reasons, so that they have warring factions that don't even know that they're of the same organization. I've put beam weapons in 5th Ed D&D because they're called the Time Cast, and they were fighting these individuals who were from the future and get the weapon, and I don't tell them that every time they roll to fire, they're overcharging the battery, and at some point the gun blows up, and I don't tell them this. I come up with this stuff. I sit down for a few hours before the game, like, oh, that'd be cool. This would be cool. I do spend a lot of time making sure that stuff is balanced. I feel like homebrew needs exceptional scrutiny because D&D is balanced in a way from playtesting. So I playtest my stuff before I throw it in. But if you come up with new concepts, new worlds, new extremes, oh, it's a Mind Flayer. Oh, it's Beholder. Oh, Gelatinous Cube. Oh, that's definitely Mimic. If they don't know what's going on, the experience of a player is so different when they interact with you. They're like, what do we do? And that to me, the discovery of a player, that's where it is.
Okay. You actually not brought up something that was not on my question. And it makes me think of when you're talking about creating weapons, creating characters. I know Brian knows this story, and he gave me so much shit for it when I ran my first campaign. I ran my children through it. Ben and my nephew David through it. And I just gave out magic items that I made up off the cuff. And they were broken. Level 7, I think Ben killed a demon lord by himself. And I gave out shit like damage, immunity, and like I didn't know anything. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for maybe 2.5, 3 months, and I just waiting till Monday to play with Brian. It's too much, so I was like, I'm going to play on the days I have off, which at that time was like Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I'm playing with my children, and I'm playing with Ben, and I'm giving out, like, there was a bow that did 60, 10 extra damage, poison immunity, like, they did all this stuff. So what was your first attempt at creating something that you realized you may have fucked it up? Because that bow I gave my son definitely was a problem. A level 7 paladin should not be doing 110 points of damage with an additional 70 points of poison damage. Feel that's a bit broken. But, so what was the first time you tried to create something and it went wrong? Brian, we'll start with you since you've got the most, you seem to be like, I remember.
I mean, yeah, there was definitely a time. This is back during 3.5. And they had a book that came out, and it detailed something called legacy weapons. They were weapons that you could awaken, and that they would level up with. So, if you did something very specific, you would, like, unlock the next tier. And every tier that you unlocked, every level that you were able to make the weapon grow, it would have new abilities that would add to previous abilities, and you could make your own legacy weapons, or they had like pre-made legacy weapons that you could use. And each one had different unlock rituals. You would have to do a different thing if you wanted to, like if you had a sword where it was able to like just kill people without even like trying. You know, you just swing a sword in a direction and just somebody dies. Like maybe the ritual for that sword was that you had to do something that was incredibly destructive with it. Like you had to, like, I don't know. There was all sorts of different things you could do with it. But like I gave everyone legacy weapons. Because I really liked the idea of it. I was all like, oh man, that's really cool. Because I like the idea of, you know, not them swapping out gear every 10 feet in a dungeon. Like, oh, hey, I found a sword. You know, let me just chuck my other sword, you know, whatever. I was like, no, I like them having like a signature weapon or a signature item. That was the other thing. You could have it be where you didn't have to have the legacy weapon necessarily be a weapon. You could have it be like a coin that they have, which like stops time or some bullshit. Or you could have it where it would be a shield that would be literally an impenetrable wall. You know, like you could turn it into a wall. Like, there's any number of different things you could have done. I gave everyone a legacy item. Mistake.
I hear that you could hear in the storytelling that that's a mistake. All I'm thinking of is that time that we purchased Strahd where Anders threw up a 60-foot wall of ice, and you're like, could have dealt with that a few times.
Actually, no. Like, that one was 100% in there, and he could have done that any time. He just only did it once, though.
Yeah, no, I'm just imagining, like, everybody's got an over-the-top ability like this.
Oh, man. It was crazy. At one point, that friendly NPC that I had in all my, like, homebrew games at that point, he had been the one to, like, give them the legacy items. So he, like, at some point asked for them back. So it was like a landlord. He was all like, no, I'm going to need that back now. Thanks.
Yeah, you're doing too much.
It was a problem.
All right, Brendan.
Yeah, from my perspective, that's a nightmare for me. I fear busting the balance of my campaign with an item like that. I think of magic items as if you think of stained glass in a cathedral or something, I think of magic items as individual pieces of colored glass. Together, they paint a wonderful picture of a character, of a well-rounded character. So they're systemic. So I try to make magic items add small effects that together, if you think of like the Baldur's Gate games where you have your paper doll and you have all your items around you, or any MMO really, all those items together paint a build of a character. So I try not to have too much of a character's effectiveness as an adventurer onto one item. With that said, it can certainly happen. You can certainly overstep. There's a saying in theater, if you do something wrong, do it quickly and no one will notice. You can give off the image of an omnipotent DM, even if you're not, if you know what you're doing. I ran the 1983 isometric, 3-4 level Castle Ravenloft as a Halloween campaign. And I just spliced it into 5th ed rather effectively and ran, and it was supposed to be for Halloween, and the party loved it so much they 100%ed it over 8 weeks. And there's only one good character in the party, and in the original Ravenloft, you actually draw tarot cards that determine the win condition of the campaign, what Strahd is weak against, and where the stuff is located. And so it was the Sun Sword in this particular case. And we only had one good character, so she had to be the Herald of the Sun Sword. So I had to sort of, this is your duty, I am Helm. And she's an elf. She was not lawful good. She's like, I don't want this. And it was a very cool dynamic where I was this omnipotent, no, you must save Ravenloft. She's like, I don't want it. It was fun. She's an intelligent person, so was her character. After that campaign, she kept the Sun Sword because they went back to their original plane. That gives me a challenge, right? Because the first Ed Sun Sword has an AoE. It's very, very potent. So what do I do as a DM? I don't say anything. She uses it again. And I'm like, Helm's light is diminished this many dimensions away from his prime plane. It does, it does this much damage. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Right? It's like, I didn't think of that until, oh, wait. She's got the Sun Sword. What do I do? So as long as you're off the cusp, and you
were able to course correct before you realized this is catastrophic.
Yeah, it's like a Japanese
I did not.
It's like a Japanese retail worker, right? Right? You're taught in Japanese society, you can't just be like, no, I can't do that. You're like, I will try my best to do this for you. If something isn't if a customer comes into a store and asks for 14 different things in their Starbucks macchiato or something. Over here, we might be like, oh, we're out of that. We can't do that. In Japan, you're put in a very stressful situation. You're like, I will try my best to do this for you. I hate saying flat out no to my parties, right? I'm like, rather than do that, let's have them observe and experience how the world is different based on what they're doing. It's so much more effective than saying, no, you can't do that. And yet I still limit them, but they discover the limits of what's happened. And so it's like I'm not even doing it. It's like they're observing, oh, okay, the Sun Sword is weaker this far away from Ravenloft because we're back in our home plane. Okay, that makes sense. It's effectively me saying, no, it doesn't do that much damage anymore. But it's packaged in such a way that they've discovered it on their own. I'm very smarmy as a DM, but it's very, very effective.
Okay. Going towards, also in the process of creation, do you guys have a particular type of encounter that you're like, this is my favorite? Or on the other side, I hate these encounters. That you try to steer away from it. We'll start, Brendan.
Yeah, I hate the idea that every campaign has to end with a big battle. I cannot stand the hero's journey kind of thing, or talk to NPCs, find out where we go. Travel segment. Random encounter possibly as they travel. Location found. Token trap or secret door. Big bad final battle. It's to me an organic campaign follows life, and life is very unpredictable. I'm always drawn to, when I play video games, I'm always drawn to video games that are more simulator-like than on rails, because I can sort of break it, or I can play it to my will. like racing games. There's some racing games that do something called rubber banding, where it's like they always put the enemy right behind your car so that you're always fighting for position. You play Gran Turismo, you can smoke a guy by like 13 minutes because your car is better. I like the idea that a party knows that's 300 orcs. We're not fighting that. And the entire mentality of the party is now about stealth and sneaking around. So I think of things with a realistic scope. So it's not like, oh, there's a room with a big bad and an ogre and whatever. I'm like, you cover 15 miles of ground to get to the dungeon. There's about 300 orcs. The tribes migrate in a particular pattern. You notice that the tents are differently colored and that there are some over here and some over here. And I paint a picture. And the party discovered, in this case, that the clans of orcs didn't like each other. That different colored tents were different warring factions, and they exploited this to their advantage and realized, hey, they're not all just ready to find us, and put on dirty clothes and walked right through. So you'd be like, oh, 300 orcs, that's going to be a tough battle. I better get my spells ready. I leave the decision to the players. Are you guys going to fight? Are you guys going to run? Are you going to solve this puzzle? Or are you, like, I had a case where I had a puzzle box, and it was a very complicated puzzle, and the character had 20 strength, threw it off a mountain, smashed it open. It's like, I don't want to railroad someone into making those decisions. All I do is I present the world around them in a very accurate way. And if you can describe the situation around them realistically and the state of play, you will see your players are smart. If they're playing D&D, there's already a baseline intelligence here of creating your character and observing and reacting to a world around you. I play to what they want, because you want your players to do what they want. Some players might prefer fighting. Some players might prefer riddles or puzzles. Some like talking. They will choose. They will choose what they want amongst themselves if you just give them the pieces and kind of sit back. So I really hate the railroading effect. So as long as I paint an accurate enough world, they will know, hey, maybe I can be smart, go this way, maybe I can do this, and you just go off of it.
Okay. Brian.
I think the best thing that a DM can do when kind of deciding like how to go about building an encounter or whatnot is to find out what you're really good at, or find out where your passions lie. I particularly am a huge fan of horror, so I love anything that I can make into something horrific. Like, that's why I play games like Call of Cthulhu, for example. I find that I'm way better at games like those, where the horror element is already built in naturally. Like, I can already like run a Ravenloft game, and I don't have to modify. It already fits the aesthetic sort of thing. But on the other hand, if I'm trying to run like a romantic game sort of thing, sometimes I just fail at that. Like, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Some people can do chase sequences really well. Some people can do puzzles really well. And it's all about like figuring out what it is you do really well and then refining that, or figuring out what you don't do so well and then saying to myself or to yourself, how can I get better at this? Like, what can I do, or what have other people done that makes this an interesting thing, and how can I take that and make it my own? So, for example, I really enjoy challenging my players when it comes to props and puzzles and whatnot. But I've also learned that particular groups have particular play styles. So I would never want to give like a group who's big on like fantasy and fighting and just kind of like the standard D&D experience. I would never want to throw them like a riddle. You know what I'm saying? Something that like you don't often see in a lot of games, where it's like, oh, you have to figure out this, complicated riddle or whatnot. Because then like your whole thing grinds to a halt. And there's nothing that kills game momentum faster than like when you throw your players into something where it's all like, great, now we got to spend like 2 hours at the table, not like even in game. Like, no, we got to spend 2 hours at table just trying to figure out this thing. And when you're a DM, if you have that situation where like, oh no, now these players are like stuck, you run into this problem where you're like, my game is stalling. What do I do? And the best thing that you can do in those situations, as far as my experience is concerned, is even when you do plan an encounter like this, plan a backup. Plan something else. Like if you know that you're going to throw your players a riddle and you know that your players aren't good at riddles, have something else waiting in the wings for them. You know what I'm saying? Like if your players suck at riddles, have it be where like if they really want to, they can just give you a knowledge check and they can like try to figure it out that way instead of having to like, you know, because maybe their character is technically smarter than they are. Maybe they have like a 20 intelligence and you're working with a player who, no offense, maybe has 8. You know, there's a lot of things you can do here. And so, like, always have backup plans, always figure out what it is you do best, and then try to work on the things that you don't do so well. Like, if you know that you're really good at combat scenes, but you're not so good at chase scenes, like if you're running Call of Cthulhu and, like, you're a combat beast, but you don't know how to run those chase sequences really well. You know what you can do is you can spend time at home. Like maybe get like just one of your other friends at the table and say, hey, I'm trying to do this thing. Do you have a couple hours to spare? And they'll be like, yeah, okay, cool. And then like the two of you can just run chase sequences. Like just chase sequences. No story, no nothing. Just like run simulations over and over again until you get better at it.
I like how you guys are like perfectly keeping the time.
Getting better at it. I promise.
Yes, yes. I was afraid I looked rude at the beginning, cutting people off, but you guys are doing very well. All right, the last question I have, and this is probably a DM preference. When you're creating a campaign, you have it, you've created the world, and now you've got your player. Are there any characters that you will not allow? This includes like concepts or multi-class or anything that you're like, no, that's just too weird. We'll start with Brendan.
I love that question. Again, the campaign I've been running, it's on hiatus. I think if you have friends that always play D&D, you'll always have some sort of campaign in the wings that's never really over. So I've been running this one for essentially 5 years, and we haven't run a game in 6 months, but it's still there, you know. I think it's important based on your setting that determines your limitations. So if I'm running a campaign where there are these things called eddies, and I take that name from the way water swirls in bodies of water, right? Like a vortex. They're sort of like gates, sort of like Planescape, except each eddy is different. So they might be one way, so from like our current plane of existence to another one and you can't go back. Or there might be another one where it's just vomiting out lava and radiation just in a cornfield because it's only to us from another dimension. And there are some that work both ways, and those are extremely valuable. What ends up happening is if I'm inviting the party to play a campaign full of entropy and cosmic shift of planes that are infringing on one another, I'm inviting them, hey, this is a campaign setting with a lot of crazy stuff. People are coming from different planes of existence. I'm saying, hey, bring what you want to the table. So in that campaign, who am I to be picky? Now, if I'm playing Ravenloft, for example, or if I'm running a Ravenloft-themed campaign, and someone wants to bring in a Warforged artificer, you know, with firearms or something, again, I hate saying no. So to me, it's more about the thematic place of that character versus whether or not they're busted. Because if a character's busted, if you're a good DM and you know what you're doing, you can more or less try to mitigate that without directly saying no, like I said earlier. So to me, it's more along the lines of thematics, or when I'm like, I had a campaign once where I had a character. Well, first off, I found out later the guy was cooking his dice, which is a whole different story if you're having unrepentant or resistant players in your campaign. But it was the classic like new to D&D playing high charisma character wanting to seduce everybody. And this was a campaign that was all about survival. So we were working on like weight reduction, conservation of arrows, food, because they were being harangued on the run in a very barren landscape. And it was all about like conserving resources. It was a lot of fight or flight. And there's a guy who had an accordion and was trying to bang everybody. What I ended up doing is your characters have to rest, right? So the character woke up and rats had smelled the food on them, chewed completely through the accordion and through their foodstuffs. The player was still the same person. They were still playing the same character. It was, I'm not saying, hey, I don't like your character, you can't do this. Their accordion was destroyed, so their musical technique was destroyed by rats. Their food was gone, and they had a communicable disease. So it's like I haven't killed the character. I haven't overtly ruined their ability to play.
First, did you give them all leprosy?
It was not leprosy. It was that's the thing. I don't want to banhammer people. So instead it was scabies. So imagine rolling up and being imagine rolling up and being like, "Hey baby." It's so again, if you don't say no, if you're smart about steering characters, the guy ended up course correcting his own character because he was new to the game. He was new to role playing. So who am I to be like, no, you can't play it. I don't like your character. No. Instead, I organically introduced him. Hey, welcome to the suck. This campaign is about the suck. You have scabies. Try to find some food, and there's holes in your pants. All of a sudden, that mentality of Eros is completely gone. And they're like, oh, by the way, roll for fatigue because you're starving. Very quickly, the person playing was like, oh, this is where I am. So, yeah, rather than say, again, this is just my preference. I don't like saying no, and I understand if some DMs do, but you can steer people towards what the campaign is going for without overtly just banhammering them, and you just invite them to the situation, and you'll notice some players, most of them, will adjust. If they don't, I mean, there's always a combat encounter. I don't know.
Right. All right. That was actually ideal. You had 11 seconds left. All right, Brian.
First off, I want to say that there's no situation on Earth in which you can always say this is always going to be the way it is, because there's always going to be that wild hair up your ass where, like, one day you say to yourself, you know what? Let's have you all play Nazis. And you're like, okay, but like, why? And then, like, it's like something where, no, here's the thing. You're all like undercover, like where you're infiltrating the Nazi party. And so you have to act like Nazis. And therefore, just to like go undercover, I don't like having people at my table who are going to be assholes, who are going to be intentionally antagonistic to the rest of the group, because that ruins the group dynamic and it ruins the fun. That is the only thing that I will hardcore say no to. If you're going to be an asshole at the table, then I'm going to come down on you, because I've had those players before. I can't do it again. It ruins a gaming group. You will find that you are never more alone than when you are an unpopular DM, because you keep inviting that guy to the table.
Right.
So, if there's any one particular thing I don't allow at my table, I don't allow essentially antagonistic behavior from particular people.
I remember your rule sheet. Like, the very first day I ever played with Brian, he hands me, like, there's like a social contract on the binder he gives you. And he's like, you violate this, you're out. And it's very clear, which I like. That was very clear expectations right from jump.
I'm gonna steal that.
That's really good.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I'll say.
I have it right here.
Send me a copy, man. That's awesome. Yeah, because you'll know if a person.
Yeah, it's really useful.
A person being a jerk predicates a character that doesn't fit in a campaign. You will notice. If a campaign is being derailed by a player character, the individual belies odious behavior outside of the game. So maybe personal attacks on another person's ideas, talking over the party, derailing the entire campaign to focus on their character alone. You'll notice behavior if a person is bad long before, hey, this character is problematic. That's a very, very good idea to sort of have a social contract. If you vet your friends, if you know your people, if they're intrinsically kind, good-hearted, and want to have fun, that will translate into the game. That's a very good point.
Absolutely.
That's a very good point.
The problem being that you don't always have that time to vet people. Because, like, let's say you want to go to a convention and you want to run a game. You know what I'm saying? You've got, like, a sign-up sheet. You're going ahead. You're, you know, basically taking players. You're going to, like, sign up everyone until noon, and then you're going to play it too.
Yeah.
You can't, like, always get to know those players right before you game. So you sometimes run the gambit of, like, running into people who are maybe not approaching the table in good faith.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. Having played a lot of D&D at this year's Gen Con, I had a buddy who was in a campaign. He accidentally rolled he rolled a character that used supplements outside of the Adventure League, and rather than be like, "Hey, write up a new character," or "Hey, go get a new one," the DM, he was good-hearted. He wasn't trying to break the game. He just wanted to have some nature flair to his druid. So he was Shaper. And so what ended up happening is the DM was just more like, okay, you can't use like this bestial ability, but I'll allow you to have, you know, a better heightened DC because of your background. And just, here we go. It was a 2-hour game, let's go. He was good-natured, just made a mistake. We're all there to have fun. We can make that adjustment for fairness' sake and go. Very fortunately, a lot of nerds are very good people. I've never really run into anyone at Gen Con who's incendiary or confrontational.
Yeah,
it's still possible, for sure.
I think one of the cool parts, like, just a little bit about mine is, I do a lot of game playing with, like, younger characters. I play with my children, and they play it. So, my youngest is 9, and you can't be a wizard. Like, it's very complex for you. So, but you can be a sorcerer, but, like, wizard is a little bit hard. Like, we'll work on it, you gotta practice. I usually start young players out as fighter, you know, barbarian. I prefer barbarian to start with because it's the easiest. 2 dice, and you gotta go, most kids love. I have noticed, you guys are talking about player trust, and this is the only part I'm gonna put in here. I've been fortunate for the last, how long have we been playing this? 2 years? 2 years we've been playing together, pretty much every week. And I know I've been playing with Brian probably for 4. I know Brian very well, and I know Ben very well. And we've been playing for 2 years online. That being said, I don't ask for their characters anymore. And a lot of the times I get shocked by what I've just allowed at the table, because I know both of them want nothing more than the game to happen. So they're not going to break the game because they want to make sure the game is back next week and the week after and the week after and the week after. That being said, these 2 jackasses have put me through the paces as a DM with some of the weirdest character creations I have ever seen. One including a bird that rode on the back of a blue dragon, and the bird could speak a language the dragon could understand, and the dragon lied about what the bird said constantly. And
that's funny.
Yeah, I have had some work gone through, but again, on the same, I don't know how to do, like, for me, still the newest DM in this group. I shy away from people who are like, I want to try a bard and a barbarian. You haven't really mastered fighter yet, so probably not. You know, maybe let's not try to do a wizard rogue, you know, if you don't know how things work. But once you get their experience, you know, or somebody that, like, I have learned your play style, I know Brian's going to make me work. As a DM, Brian is going to make me work. Ben is going to make me work. I'm assuming when I DM for you, Brendan, you're probably going to put me through the paces as well, and I'm going to be like, all right. But it's fun. I like to roll with it. You guys are experienced players, so it's a different game. But, all right, those are all my questions. If you have anything you guys want to add or any information that we could put out, let me know.
I guess, Joel, as the newest DM to Dungeons & Dragons broadly, what is it that you feel you personally are strongest in, and what you are lacking in the most?
I feel very confident in my ability to tell a story. I have a running narrative in my head of just about all the time of like random stories and things like that, which is why I write. And so like when I'm playing a game, Dungeons and Dragons, like I see it. I see it like I'm watching a movie in my head, and I'm just telling you what's happening. I can roll with the punches when you say you're going to do something and let the dice tell me where to go. I'm extremely adaptable, I feel. That being said, my greatest weakness is also I can tell a story. And I stop. I struggle because I don't want to stop for encounters. You're like, there's a manicore, and it's right in your face. Ah, fuck that. So anyways, we're still walking, you know, like... Yeah, there's a village being killed by dragons. I didn't even talk about that village. We gotta go to the cave, you know, like, I'm a high role play, not a lot of encounter. I do need to work on it. I have had players, both you and Ben, being like, maybe we can throw an encounter in just once, you know? It's been 4 weeks. Oh, shit. That is mine. Is I need to bring the encounters in a little bit more frequently, because I do fall into my narrative, and I love my narrative. I love my stories. I love my role playing and bringing in the characters and giving them weird names and all that stuff. I love creating it on the fly. I've been told I give my players a lot of control and a lot of player agency so they can move around and decide where they're going. That being said, I don't challenge a whole lot. I could bring up the encounters a little bit more and plan for a little bit more at a time.
I got 2 suggestions for you if you'd like to hear them.
All right.
So, I was buying Christmas presents at a World Market. My brother loves olives. I was buying olives, and for some reason, by the checkout aisle, they had these small glass hourglasses of 10, 5, and 1 minute, just on a little piece of wood. It's like knickknacks, right? That has helped me so immeasurably in my campaigns. If the party is kind of waffling on a riddle, if they don't know what to do, if they're being indecisive, if a battle is kind of going for a while, I flip that hourglass and the room, you hear a pin drop, like, what's going to happen? What's good? All right, come on, go. So all I do is I flip that hourglass and they're like, oh shit, got real. So sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes I just use it to get them going. But sometimes I'm like, hey, I mean, remember, the best strength of A New Hope was the editing, right? Academy Award for best editing. The timing and the order in which information is produced can be just as valuable as that information. The pacing can be, I mean, we're essentially living through a story, right? When we're running a D&D game. So if things are dragging along, if you're like, hey, I want to get back to the story. If you're running an encounter, I have my encounters in pools. So that what that means is I have like, okay, so they may run into like D10 gnolls. They might run into like some of those lobster dudes that I wrote up. They might run into something like this. And I have like certain encounters, and I'll roll like a d4 and be like, okay, it's these guys. You may be wondering, hey, how do I get this encounter into my overarching story? Well, I use my NPCs and I tie in MacGuffins, right? Just like any film. So it's like, wait a second, maybe this encounter, maybe they work for the big bad. And the party can choose to fight them, and they get a key that can get them inside. Or they can follow them and go right in if they're getting cheeky. All right, so if you tie the encounter thematically into the storyline, they will choose if they want to fight. They may not fight and get sneaky. With humanoids and with certain creatures, if the encounter is taking too long and you want to get back to the story, if the party's winning handedly, take this from Warhammer, you can roll for morale. I usually will roll for morale. I'll do like a save versus charisma, and if orcs are getting wiped, right? If a beholder is really wounded, and they've been going at it for 25 minutes, and I want to get back to the story, panic and they flee, right?
Yeah, I have used that. I'm just not feeling it before.
Yeah, so I mean, as long as you have the macro and you have that expediency of like where you want to go, and you have Batman's the best when he's got prep time, right? If you've got prepped what enemies might show up or what MacGuffins would be available, you can just pull from your pools of stuff and be like, okay, we'll put this guy's here because they rolled an encounter, and we'll say, hey, let's say they work for the big bad. That way they can choose to follow them, they can interrogate them. If it's like, hey, stop, we're going to kill you, so why don't you fuss up? If they want to kill them all, and wow, man, we've been going at 30 minutes. I'll just take off some of their HP because they're CR1. So there are ways you can get the story going for sure.
Brian, do you have anything you want to add?
I think that, Brenna's right. And don't be afraid to, add little details for rewarding players who seek out that story, though. Like, for example, if you've got a bunch of players who are, we'll say murder hobos, but then you've got the one player at the table who really likes a good story. Throw in little extras for that player. Like, maybe he did his research beforehand, and he knows that the reason why the kobolds abducted this woman is because the kobold leader is actually in love with her, and it's not so much that they abducted her, maybe it's that she went willingly, and he knows that sort of thing. And so that enhances the encounter later on when you're, 4 levels deep in the kobold dungeon, and, now, you've kind of got this encounter of, what do we do with this, woman, because she'll die to save her kobold lover or whatnot, you know what I'm saying? And the murder hobos, they don't fucking care. They're like, yeah, whatever. But now you've got this other character who's, conflicted. And so now he's creating party conflict within, not like party conflict like he's being antagonistic to the rest of the group. Now he's legitimately, got this thing about him where he's conflicted. He is like, I don't know if we should be doing this or not, guys. I know that we need to get rid of the kobolds because they're kind of a problem for the town or whatnot. But what we doing is really right. What are we doing here? You can do all sorts of really interesting things when you tie your adventures into a greater narrative and then seed that narrative to players who seek it out. And another great way to incentivize that is the inspiration system from 5th edition, where you can award your players inspiration for doing something. Oh, what's that? You sought out a creative solution to this problem that wasn't just swing my axe into its face. You get inspiration. Oh, what's that? You did something that was wildly against what mechanically works for your character, but you did it for the sake of story. You get inspiration.
That is
incentivizes them. Yeah,
exactly. You can do anything with that, and it's something where you can take that sort of a concept and you can bring it to any other game system. What's that? You're doing Call of Cthulhu? Doesn't matter. Give them inspiration anyways. Say oh hey, you get to roll that die over again just because I said so. Or, oh hey, you get to do this other thing that you wouldn't normally be able to do because you have inspiration. One of the best parts of the new Star Wars game from the Fantasy Flight system was that they incorporated basically the bullshit system is what I like to call it, where you had a bunch of points on a table. You would be as many points as you had players or whatnot, and half of them would start off as dark side points, and half of them would start off as light side points. Your players had access to the light side points, and they could use those light side points to essentially come up with bullshit on the fly, where it's oh shit, my gun's out of ammunition, and we didn't stop off at that town. What do? I'm going to take a light side point, and I'm going to flip it to a dark side point, and when I do that, I say that I actually remembered that there's more ammunition right here in my coat, and it's so they can literally, they can bullshit, but then the dark side points can be used by the DMs, and whenever the dark side points get used, they flip to light side points. Whenever the light side points get flipped by players, they flip to dark side points. It creates a natural sort of balance.
That's awesome. That's very creative.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
All right. We're coming up on time. So, I think Wednesday, Ben is still on vacation, so we do not get to start Candlekeep. Mm-hmm. If everybody's in agreement, I would like to reconvene and kind of continue on this topic, except talking about instead of more how we go about it, let's talk about our favorite experiences as DM. Maybe something that you did phenomenally well, you thought was really cool, or you thought was absolutely horrible, but turned out to be a really fun part of the story. Just to kind of tell the highlights of like our lives as storytellers in whatever scenario or setting that you want. If it wants to be Call of Cthulhu or Warhammer or Dungeons and Dragons, whichever one. Just a bunch of stories next time on how things went well or how things went bad. And if everybody's in agreement, we'll see everybody on Wednesday, same time, 4:30. It will be a shorter episode because, again, it's not a campaign, but we look forward to seeing all of you there. And thanks for stopping by.
Take care. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for all of our previous videos.
Thank you.